What would you do if 30,000 feet in the air, the very person meant to ensure your safety suddenly turned against you? What if, in front of a cabin full of strangers, a flight attendant raised her hand, not in service, but in humiliation, striking you across the face? And what if the man she slapped, the man she dismissed as though he didn't belong, was in fact the CEO of the very airline she worked for? This is not just a story about one flight. It's about dignity tested in the harshest of moments. It's about silence that carried more weight than shouting, composure that outshone violence, and a single act of prejudice that sparked a movement across an entire industry. As we follow Christopher Langston's journey from humiliation to revelation, from victim of discrimination to architect of reform, one question will linger: how much power does calm truth hold in a world so often driven by outrage? Stay with us, because this is more than a headline. It's a legacy in the making. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss stories that reveal not just what happened, but what it truly means. Christopher Langston blended into the crowd at San Diego International Airport like any other traveler catching an early morning flight. He carried nothing that marked him as powerful, nothing that hinted at the fact that he was the newly appointed CEO of Aurelia Air, one of the largest carriers in the United States. No tailored suit, no polished leather briefcase, no assistant hovering nearby, just a 42-year-old black man in a charcoal hoodie, jeans with a faint scuff near the knee, and a backpack slung casually over one shoulder. His sneakers were worn from weekend jogs along the bay, the kind of shoes you'd find in any outlet mall. The only item betraying his success was the steel blue watch hugging his wrist, a Rolex gifted to him by his father the day he accepted the CEO role 3 months earlier. But even that was mostly hidden under his sleeve. Christopher believed invisibility was a kind of superpower. Growing up in Memphis, in neighborhoods where airplanes thundered overhead, but few neighbors could afford a ticket, he had learned early that blending in kept you safe. It let you see people's real character when they thought you were nobody. This morning, blending in served another purpose. He wasn't flying on Aurelia's corporate jet. He wasn't using his executive privileges. He had deliberately purchased an economy ticket online, then quietly upgraded it to a first-class seat with his personal credit card. Row 2, seat C, no special arrangements, no entourage, no corporate handlers, just him, a man in a hoodie, ready to see how his employees treated passengers when they thought nobody important was watching. The terminal buzzed with all the ordinary chaos of travel. Rolling suitcases rattled over tile. Gate announcements echoed overhead. Coffee lines stretched endlessly, filled with bleary-eyed commuters desperate for caffeine. At Gate B12, families wrangled restless children, while business travelers checked their phones every few seconds, already rehearsing presentations they would deliver in New York. Christopher sipped from a paper cup of black coffee and observed it all quietly, almost like a researcher studying a live experiment. In a way, that's exactly what this was. He had been CEO for 90 days, enough time to improve metrics on paper, but not enough to know the soul of the company. Customer satisfaction surveys looked promising. On-time performance had ticked upward, but numbers only told part of the story. What really mattered was how employees treated people when no one in authority was looking. He needed to know, and the only way to know was to walk in as an ordinary passenger. When the gate agent announced pre-boarding, Christopher stayed back. He wanted to see how priority passengers were handled. He noticed how the gate agent's smile widened for men in tailored suits, how her tone softened for families with children, how her voice carried extra warmth for platinum status travelers. And he noticed, too, how her tone shifted when his turn came. Boarding pass, an ID, please, she said briskly, scanning his documents twice, as if expecting something to be off. Her smile thinned. First-class seat. 2C. Yes, ma'am, Christopher said politely. Her eyes flickered up, scanning his hoodie, sneakers, and backpack. A small pause, then a reluctant nod. You're good, she said finally, handing back his pass. He didn't argue, didn't point out that other passengers had breezed through with less scrutiny. He simply thanked her and walked down the jet bridge. But inside, he logged it like a pilot marking turbulence. A note in his invisible notebook. Bias, subtle but clear. The cabin of the Boeing 737 was cool and softly lit. First class looked immaculate, charcoal leather seats, polished trays, the faint scent of citrus cleaner. A flight attendant stood near the galley greeting passengers. Her name tag read, Claire Donovan. She smiled widely at the man ahead of him, a young consultant in a crisp blue blazer, then turned her attention to Christopher. The smile faltered. It didn't vanish, but it cooled. Boarding pass, she asked, though no one else before him had been asked to show it again at the door. Christopher handed it over. Seat 2C, she said, her eyebrows arching slightly. That's right there. Her tone was neutral, not hostile, but there was something in the air between them, an unspoken suggestion that his presence required verification. He nodded, retrieved his pass, and slid into his seat. He didn't complain. He didn't need to. Years of flying fighter jets in the Navy had taught him discipline. Years of climbing through the airline industry baggage handler, ticket counter. Overnight operations had taught him patience. He had seen worse than skepticism in a flight attendant's eyes. But still, he felt the familiar sting of being doubted before being known. Passengers filed in. A law student named Leah Martinez, seat 3B, smiled at him politely before settling down with her backpack full of casebooks. In 1A, a venture capitalist scrolled through his phone, barely looking up. In 2A across the aisle, an older businessman tucked a newspaper into the seat pocket. The cabin filled with the soft rustle of jackets, zippers, and safety briefings. Christopher leaned back and let the rhythm of the moment sink in. He was not here as CEO. He was here as every traveler who had ever been questioned, overlooked, or doubted for no reason other than appearance. His father's voice echoed in memory. Son, people will test you, not with words you can challenge in court, but with the pauses, the looks, the assumptions. Hold steady. Dignity is your armor. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Ahead lay a 3-hour flight to New York. He had no idea that those 3 hours would alter not only his career, but an entire industry. For now, it was just another morning, just another flight, just a man in a hoodie, sitting quietly in 2C, waiting to see what truth the skies might reveal. Christopher settled into seat 2C, the hum of the cabin pressing gently against his thoughts. The leather felt cool beneath his arms. He adjusted his position, slipping his backpack under the seat in front of him. Around him, first class unfolded like a little world within the larger plane. 16 seats arranged in symmetry, a microcosm of hierarchy and expectation. He had flown in cabins like this more times than he could count, sometimes as a paying passenger, sometimes in uniform, and now often in the discreet comfort of an executive jet. But this morning felt different. He wasn't here to enjoy the perks of legroom and early service. He was here as a witness, to see who was kind when no one told them to be, to see who measured worth by a boarding pass, and who measured it by humanity. Claire Donovan moved along the aisle, her uniform immaculate. Her hair twisted into a precise bun that didn't allow a single strand to escape. She greeted a couple in row 1 with warmth, offered to hang their coats, and chatted about their connection in Chicago. Her voice carried a lilting friendliness that seemed designed to soothe. When she reached Christopher's row, her tone cooled again. It wasn't overt. It was the kind of thing only someone trained to observe someone who had learned to read a room like a pilot reads a radar screen would notice. The slight hesitation before she spoke, the narrowing of her eyes as if to measure. "Can I get you settled with anything?" she asked. Christopher smiled politely. "No, thank you. I'm fine." She nodded quickly. No small talk, no offer of a blanket or a drink. Then pivoted to the man in 2A. "And for you, Sir, water champagne," before takeoff. The contrast stung, not because he needed champagne, but because the difference wasn't about service. It was about assumption. Christopher leaned back, resting his head against the seat, eyes half closed. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Instead, a quiet sadness threaded through him. He had spent a lifetime proving he belonged in rooms where others doubted him. Combat missions over Iraq. MBA classes where he was the only black student. Boardrooms where his ideas were second-guessed until repeated by someone else. Now, even as CEO of one of the largest airlines in America, dressed down deliberately to test authenticity, he still encountered the same ancient question behind people's eyes. "Do you belong here?" Across the aisle, Leah Martinez, the law student, noticed too. She watched the way Claire's demeanor shifted, watched the slight dismissal in her voice toward Christopher. Oh, Leah had grown up with immigrant parents who ran a corner grocery in New Mexico, and she knew that look, the look of someone scanning for reasons to doubt you. She tucked the observation away, though for now she said nothing. The cabin filled with the final shuffle of boarding. Overhead, bins slammed shut. The intercom crackled with the pilot's voice, steady and reassuring. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Fraser. We'll be departing shortly. Flight time to New York, just under 4 hours. Smooth weather ahead. Sit back, relax, and let us take care of you." As the engine spooled and the plane rolled back from the gate, Christopher stared out the oval window. The sun was climbing over the Pacific, casting long beams of light across the tarmac. He thought of his father, James Langston, who had loaded cargo planes at FedEx for 30 years, coming home with sore shoulders but a proud smile. His father had believed in steady work, believed that dignity was earned not by what others gave you, but by what you carried within yourself. Christopher whispered almost under his breath, "Let's see how deep this goes." The plane roared down the runway and lifted into the sky. For a while, there was only the usual quiet passengers adjusting, attendants preparing carts, the soft ding of the seatbelt sign turning off. Claire began service in row 1. Her voice bright again, offering coffee in ceramic cups, arranging fruit bowls, and chatting with practiced charm. Christopher watched her pattern closely. She leaned slightly toward the white businessman in 1A, asking if he wanted lemon with his tea. She crouched at eye level with the woman in 1B, smiling warmly about her connecting flight. Every gesture carried care. When Claire reached Christopher, her warmth cooled again, like a curtain falling. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked flatly. "Coffee, black," he replied evenly. She poured it into a flimsy plastic cup, setting it down without eye contact, then immediately brightened again for the man across the aisle, placing a ceramic cup of orange juice on a napkin as if it were fine china. The difference was obvious. So obvious that Leah Martinez lowered her casebook and tilted her phone discreetly, beginning to record. Christopher noticed but said nothing. His calm wasn't silence born of weakness. It was deliberate. He knew dignity sometimes meant letting others reveal themselves fully before you moved. He sipped from the plastic cup, the taste slightly metallic. Around him, he could feel eyes beginning to notice. Small glances, quick looks. People were paying attention, even if they didn't speak. In the quiet, his mind wandered. He remembered nights in his 20s when he'd worked ticket counters, being mistaken for a porter instead of an operations coordinator. He remembered professors who assumed he'd been admitted to his MBA program because of diversity quotas rather than merit. He remembered combat missions when his wingmen had doubted his orders until the maneuvers saved their lives. He thought about his children, grown now, who sometimes asked why he still wore hoodies on casual days, why he insisted on blending in instead of dressing like the corporate titan he was. He had told them the truth, that invisibility wasn't weakness. It was a mirror that revealed the truth in others. As Claire moved down the aisle, Christopher rested his cup on the tray and folded his hands. He felt the beginning of something stir in the cabin, a tension, a current building under the surface. He had seen storms form like this from a cockpit, clear skies turning turbulent in minutes. He recognized the signs. Leah Martinez glanced at him, then back at her phone. The businessman in 2A had begun frowning at the discrepancy in service. Even the older veteran in row 5, Samuel Brooks, leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. The flight was less than an hour in, and already the cabin had split into two realities, one where passengers were treated with warmth, and one where a single man in a hoodie was treated as if invisible. Christopher's inner voice was steady but questioning. Do I confront now? Do I let this escalate? What's more powerful, silence or speech? He breathed deeply, choosing patience. He wanted to see the full measure of this moment. For now, he simply waited. Coffee, cooling in the thin plastic cup. While the story of Flight 619 began writing itself in the quiet tension between rows of leather seats. The engines hummed steadily as Flight 619 leveled at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin shifted into its familiar rhythm. Some passengers leaned back to nap. Others opened laptops, and the first-class attendants began preparing the next round of service. Christopher sat quietly in 2C, his posture straight but unthreatening. He had learned long ago how to command presence without raising his voice, how to claim space without demanding it. The coffee in the flimsy plastic cup sat untouched on his tray. The difference between that and the ceramic cup surrounding him more glaring by the minute. Across the aisle, Gregory Holt swirled his orange juice in its heavy glass and glanced sideways. He wasn't a particularly empathetic man. Gregory was a private equity partner used to cutting deals that left others bleeding, but even he felt a flicker of unease at the disparity. He leaned toward the aisle, pretending to adjust his seatbelt, and muttered just loudly enough, "Strange choice. Plastic." Christopher didn't respond. He simply folded his hands on his lap, his expression unreadable. Claire Donovan rolled her service cart forward, her steps brisk, her shoulders stiff with the practiced posture of someone who had spent years being evaluated on appearance. She stopped at row 1, bending with warmth toward the passengers there, pouring refills, offering biscotti and warm nuts. Her smile widened at each interaction, the model of first-class charm. Then she reached row 2. Gregory Holt received another glass of juice, placed carefully on a linen napkin, along with a choice of cheese or fruit. Claire laughed at something he said, her hand brushing the edge of his tray as though sealing a contract of rapport. And then she turned slightly, barely looking at Christopher. "Would you like more coffee?" she asked. The tone clipped, transactional. Christopher's voice was low but steady. "Yes, please. And a napkin, if you have one." Claire reached into the cart, pulled out a thin paper napkin, and set it down beside the plastic cup with an audible thud. Then she poured a refill lukewarm, still in the plastic. "Anything else?" Her tone carried the faintest trace of annoyance, the kind of edge that says you've already asked too much. Christopher held her gaze for a long moment before shaking his head. "That will do. Leah Martinez and 3B. Phone tilted discreetly against her casebook, captured the entire exchange. She wasn't trying to provoke trouble. She had simply seen enough subtle dismissals in her own life to know this was worth documenting. The tension grew thicker with each minute. Sarah Blake in 4A lowered her magazine, frowning at the uneven service. Samuel Brooks, the veteran in 5C, leaned forward even further, his eyes narrowing with the patience of someone cataloging evidence. The quiet test Christopher had begun hours earlier was now becoming a public lesson, though he hadn't spoken a word of protest. Inside, though, he felt the stirrings of conflict. He thought of his mother, who had worked double shifts as a hospital janitor and taught him never to let people reduce his dignity. He thought of his father, who had once stood silently as a supervisor barked orders, then whispered later to his son. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade, but now Christopher wasn't sure which blade to use. Do I speak? Do I let her continue and reveal herself fully? Do I end this before it grows into something uglier? He inhaled, then exhaled slowly, choosing restraint once more. Claire moved down the aisle, the contrast in her manner obvious to everyone now. She chatted with Sarah Blake, offered her a choice of teas, even bent to untangle the cord of her headphones with a reassuring pat on the arm. Then she passed Christopher's row again without a glance. Leah tilted her phone openly this time, no longer subtle. She whispered into the mic, "Viewers, you're seeing this. Row 2, seat C, ignored again. Same attendant, different treatment." Her live stream counter ticked upward, from a few dozen to several hundred. Gregory Holt cleared his throat. "Uncomfortable." "Excuse me," he said to Claire as she turned back toward the galley. "You skipped his tray again." Claire stiffened. For a moment, her polished mask cracked. She glanced at Christopher, then back at Gregory. "I served him already," she said curtly. Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Not the same way you served me." A few passengers chuckled nervously, while others exchanged glances. Claire flushed, then forced a tight smile. "I'll be back shortly." She pushed the cart toward the galley, in 2C. Christopher remained still. Inside, though, his heart pressed against his ribs. He wasn't angry, but he felt the weight of every eye now watching him, the quiet expectation that he would respond. He thought of the young pilots under his command years ago, the ones who had looked to him for steadiness in combat, the ones who had steadied themselves on his calm even when missiles filled the sky. He whispered inwardly, "Almost there. Let the storm come." 10 minutes later. Claire returned without the cart, holding a small tray. On it sat a glass of water, another flimsy plastic cup of coffee, and a handful of mixed nuts tossed into a paper bowl. She set the tray on Christopher's table with a forced brightness. "There you are, sir. Coffee, nuts, and water. Happy now?" The sarcasm was sharp, audible enough for the surrounding rows. A ripple of shock moved through the cabin. Leah's phone caught it all. Christopher looked at the tray, then back at her. His voice, low but calm, carried to every ear in first class. "I never asked for special treatment. Only the same courtesy you've shown everyone else." His words cut through the recycled air with surgical precision. He didn't raise his voice, but the silence afterward made it echo louder than any shout. Claire's face hardened, her jaw set. She was cornered now not by him, but by her own choices. The eyes of nearly 20 passengers pinned her in place, and somewhere in the back of the plane, coach passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. Leah's live stream ticked past 1,000 viewers, comments flashing too quickly to follow. Outrage, support, shock. Christopher folded his hands again, waiting. He had spent his entire life training for moments like this, not the flying, not the business negotiations, but the moments when people revealed who they truly were. And he was tasked with holding the mirror steady. Claire's voice dropped, just loud enough for the cabin to hear. "Maybe if you dressed the part, you'd get the part." The words landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. Ripples of disbelief spread through the rows. Someone gasped audibly. Christopher didn't move, didn't flinch. He only asked softly, "What part is that?" Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. Her silence was an answer in itself. Samuel Brooks, the veteran, spoke from 5C, his voice carrying the gravel of age and the authority of battles fought long ago. "Young lady, I've been watching since we left Los Angeles. That man has asked for nothing more than what you've given everyone else freely. You can't hide behind excuses anymore. We all see what's happening." Claire whipped toward him, her composure shattering. "Mind your own business." But the cabin had already shifted. Passengers were no longer quiet observers. They were participants, witnesses. The power she thought she wielded as the uniformed authority in the room was slipping from her grasp with every word. Christopher closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. He could feel the storm tightening, the walls of the cabin becoming a courtroom, every row a jury box. And still, he waited. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in striking first. It's in holding still until the truth reveals itself so fully that no one can deny it. The truth, he knew, was only moments away. The hum of the engines masked the silence that had fallen in the cabin. It was a silence charged not with peace, but with unease, a stillness that felt like the pause before a thunderclap. Passengers shifted in their seats, some feigning distraction with magazines or laptops, others staring openly now, their gazes flicking between Christopher and the woman in uniform who stood just a few feet away. Claire Donovan adjusted the cuff of her sleeve as if it were the most important task in the world. Her jaw was set, her shoulders pulled back. The authority of the uniform was her shield, her last remaining defense, but even she felt it cracking. She could sense the weight of judgment in the air, could feel her audience growing restless. Christopher sat motionless in 2C. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't demanded anything extraordinary. Yet his calm had become a mirror, reflecting everything she wished to hide. He didn't have to accuse her. His silence was accusation enough. Leah Martinez angled her phone more openly now, the lens fixed steadily on the tableau in row 2. Her live stream counter ticked higher and higher, comments scrolling so quickly she could barely read them. Words like unbelievable, racist, lawsuit filled her screen. She whispered into the mic, "For everyone just joining, this is Aurelia Air Flight 619. What you're seeing is live. Passenger in 2C being singled out, again and again." Gregory Holt shifted in 2A, restless. He was not a man used to moral dilemmas, numbers, profits, takeovers, that was his world. But sitting this close, the imbalance gnawed at him. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for Claire to hear. Her head snapped toward him, eyes flashing. "Sir, if you'll allow me to handle my cabin." "Your cabin," Gregory interrupted. "Funny, it doesn't look like it belongs to you. It looks like it belongs to all of us who paid to be here." Gas rippled through the rows. Claire's face reddened, her polished mask unraveling thread by thread. Christopher remained silent, his gaze steady, but inside, his thoughts churned. This is spiraling. Should I end it now? Reveal myself. Shut this down before it goes too far, or let it reach the breaking point. He thought of his board waiting in New York, of the quarterly review that could shift the company's future. He thought of his employees, thousands of them, who trusted him to lead with integrity. And he thought of his father's voice, always his compass. Dignity isn't silence. Son, it's knowing when to speak and when to let the world convict itself. Claire turned back to him, her composure cracking like glass under pressure. "Sir, I'll need to see your boarding pass again," she said, louder than necessary. Her voice carried through first class and into coach. Christopher reached calmly into his hoodie pocket and pulled it out. "Seat 2C, he said evenly, handing it over. She scanned it quickly, as though searching for a flaw. Then her lips curled. "There must be a mistake. This ticket doesn't look valid for first class." Whispers erupted immediately. Sarah Blake in 4A shook her head, appalled. Samuel Brooks sat up straighter in 5C, his hands gripping the armrests. "That's enough," he said firmly, his voice gravelly with age, but unyielding. Claire ignored him, thrusting the pass back at Christopher. "Sir, I'll ask you to gather your things and move to the rear cabin. We have other passengers who belong here." The word "belonged" sliced through the air like a blade. Passengers flinched. Leah's phone caught every syllable. Christopher looked down at the crumpled boarding pass in his hand. He felt the familiar ache of centuries behind that word, the long shadow of being told again and again where he could and could not sit, where he could and could not belong. His chest tightened. His mind split in two, half urging him to stand, to reveal himself, to end it, half urging him to wait, to let the truth expose itself in the brightest possible light. He inhaled slowly. "This is my seat," he said, voice calm but resonant. "I paid for it. I have every right to be here." Claire's eyes blazed. "If you don't comply, I'll be forced to call security when we land." The words hung heavy. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Gregory muttered. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "He's done nothing wrong." But Claire doubled down, her voice rising. "This is my cabin, and I decide who stays in first class." Leah's live stream spiked past 3,000 viewers. Comments flooded. "This is discrimination. Get her badge number. He should sue." Christopher's pulse quickened, but his exterior remained composed. He thought of his children, of the legacy he wanted to leave them, not just wealth, but an example of strength under fire. He remembered his father's hands, scarred from decades of loading planes, hands that had carried dignity even when stripped of recognition. So he sat still, meeting Claire's stare with quiet resolve. The silence stretched, unbearable. And then, like a match to dry tinder, it caught fire. Claire leaned closer, her voice dripping venom now. "You know exactly what I mean. People like you don't belong in first class." The words detonated. Passengers gasped audibly. A woman in row 1 whispered, "Oh my God!" Gregory swore under his breath. Leah nearly dropped her phone, her live stream exploding with outrage. Christopher felt the sting deep in his chest, not because he hadn't heard it before he had, in classrooms, in boardrooms, in whispers behind his back, but because it was spoken here, in front of strangers, in a cabin meant to represent service and professionalism, spoken without fear, as if his dignity were disposable. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. The weight of generations pressed on him. The faces of ancestors who had been told the same words, in different forms. The faces of his children who would inherit either silence or courage from this moment. When he opened his eyes, his voice was calm, almost gentle. Say it again, if that's truly what you mean. Claire froze. The cabin was utterly silent now, every passenger holding their breath. Her lips trembled, caught between pride and fear, between the authority of the uniform and the truth that had already slipped free. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped back, her hands shaking slightly, but the damage was done. The storm had broken. Christopher leaned back, folding his arms. Inside, though, his thoughts raged. How far will she go? How much further before I intervene? Do I wait for the breaking point, or has it already come? He glanced out the window. The clouds below stretched like endless white fields, serene and untroubled, a stark contrast to the turbulence in his chest. He whispered inwardly, "Hold steady. The truth is nearly here." Leah's live stream hit 5,000 viewers. Comments screamed across her screen. This is history. This is injustice live. He's a hero for staying calm. She's done for. And still, Christopher waited, because he knew the worst was yet to come. The cabin of Flight 619 had turned into a theater. Every passenger now a silent witness to a drama unfolding 25,000 feet above the earth. The hum of the engines filled the pauses between words, a low drone that seemed to heighten the tension rather than calm it. Christopher Langston remained seated in 2C, his body still but his mind alight with storm. Across the aisle, Gregory Holt sat rigid, his fists pressing into his knees. Leah Martinez kept her phone raised, her live stream growing by the hundreds every minute, the screen a blur of outrage and disbelief from strangers around the world. Sarah Blake leaned forward from 4A, her jaw tight, and Samuel Brooks, the veteran in 5C, sat upright with the steady patience of a man who had weathered too many storms to be easily rattled. But his eyes burned with righteous anger. At the center of it all stood Claire Donovan. Her breathing had grown shallow, her voice sharper with every exchange. Authority was her armor, but it was buckling under the weight of the truth staring back at her. She had crossed lines already service withheld, words that stung like darts, but her pride refused retreat. Christopher's calm was her greatest enemy. He had not raised his voice, not lashed out, not given her the chaos she could twist into justification. His dignity was a mirror she could not bear to look into, because it reflected not his weakness, but her own cruelty. "Sir," she said again, louder now, her voice shaking slightly, "I've told you, this seat is not yours. You need to move." Christopher looked down at the boarding pass still in his hand. His thumb traced the numbers 2C as though they were etched in stone. When he raised his eyes again, his voice was low but carried with unmistakable weight. "This is my seat. I purchased it, and I will not move." Her jaw clenched. Passengers stirred, Leah whispered into her phone. "He's standing his ground, calm as anything. She's unraveling." Claire stepped closer, her shadow falling across his tray table. "You're disturbing this cabin. If you don't comply." I'll have you escorted when we land." "That won't be necessary," Samuel Brooks said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "He's not disturbing anyone. You are." The words struck like a slap of their own. A ripple of murmurs traveled down the rows. Claire's face flushed crimson, but she pressed forward, turning her anger squarely back on Christopher. "You think being quiet makes you innocent," she snapped. "You think sitting there with your hoodie pulled up gives you the right to disrespect me in my cabin. You don't belong here. Not dressed like that. Not acting like this." The phrase "not belong here" landed heavy. A stone dropped into still water. Sarah gasped audibly. Gregory muttered, "Unbelievable." Leah's livestream numbers leapt again, the comments exploding. "She said it again. This is blatant. He belongs more than she does." Christopher inhaled slowly. Every instinct told him to end it, to reveal his identity, to reclaim control before it went further. But another voice, the deeper, quieter one that had guided him through combat flights and boardroom battles alike, told him to wait. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "what does belonging in first class look like to you?" Her lips twisted. She wanted to stop, but pride dragged her further. "It looks like people who respect the space, people who pay their way, people who look like they fit here." The words hung like a confession. No one moved. No one breathed. Gregory Holt leaned forward in his seat, his voice tight with anger. "That's enough. He's done nothing wrong. You're humiliating yourself." But Claire couldn't retreat. Panic, embarrassment, and years of buried resentment fused into something volatile. She jabbed her finger toward Christopher's chest. "You people always want special treatment, always crying foul when you don't get it. Well, not today. Not in my cabin." Gaffs erupted. A woman in coach who had craned forward actually cried out. Did she just say that phones tilted higher? Leah's live stream doubled again, the viewer count climbing past 10,000. Christopher rose slowly from his seat. At 6'2", his presence filled the narrow aisle. The cabin's air shifted, thick with expectation. He did not tower with aggression, but with a calm authority that made the space feel smaller around him. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "step back." Her breath hitched. Her authority was slipping away, yet her pride refused surrender. The eyes of dozens burned into her, judgment heavy and undeniable. She should have stopped. She should have walked away, but something inside her broke instead. "Sit down!" she barked, her voice shrill with desperation. Christopher did not move. His gaze remained steady, his tone calm. "I won't repeat myself. Step back." And then, with a suddenness that shocked even her, Claire's hand came up. Open palm, wide arc, years of frustration and 30 seconds of panic exploding into a single motion. The slap cracked across Christopher's face, sharp and unmistakable. The sound ricocheted through the cabin, louder than the engines, louder than the hum of air through the vents. Passengers froze mid-breath. The silence after was absolute, the kind of silence that follows catastrophe. Christopher's head turned slightly with the blow. A red handprint bloomed across his cheek. He didn't raise a hand to it, didn't step back or forward. He simply stood there, absorbing the violence, his stillness more powerful than any retaliation. Sarah's voice broke the silence first. She hit him. She actually hit him. Gregory was already half out of his seat, fury written on his face. "That's assault. We all saw it." Leah's phone trembled in her hand as she whispered to her thousands of viewers. "You just saw it. Live." She slapped him. her chat feed blurred with disbelief. Arrest her? Fire her now? How is this happening? Samuel Brooks, the veteran, spoke with quiet thunder. Young lady, you just committed a crime in front of 20 witnesses. Claire's chest heaved. She stared at her hand as if it belonged to someone else, as if she couldn't quite comprehend what it had done. The magnitude of the moment began to seep in, dread curling at the edges of her anger. Christopher finally turned his head back toward her, his cheek flushed with the imprint of her hand. His eyes locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. His voice was calm, almost terrifying in its restraint. Ma'am, you need to step away from me now. The authority in his words was different this time, not a plea, not even a command, but a certainty. The voice of a man who had stood in cockpits with alarms screaming, who had faced boardrooms filled with doubt and still walked out with victory. Claire's knees weakened. For the first time, she felt the weight of what she had unleashed. Phones captured her every tremble, her every flicker of panic. The cabin was no longer hers. It belonged to the truth now. Christopher's thoughts, however, were not triumph, but turmoil. He had endured insults before, had weathered prejudice in silence, but never had it come to this, never with so many watching, never so exposed. He thought of his children, his employees, the thousands of people who depended on him. He thought of whether dignity meant enduring quietly or standing as a symbol for those who could not. His father's voice returned once more. Sometime, son, silence is strength, but sometimes silence is surrender. He drew in a breath, knowing the moment to choose had finally arrived. And around him, the passengers waited, their phones recording, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding. Above the endless clouds, a single act of violence had shattered the illusion of civility in first class. What came next would decide not only the fate of one flight attendant, but the future of an entire airline. The sound of the slap still lingered, suspended in the pressurized air like thunder echoing after lightning. For a long moment, no one moved. Every eye was fixed on row 2, on the red mark spreading across Christopher Langston's cheek, on the trembling hand of Claire Donovan, and on the stillness that followed. Silence in an airplane cabin is rare. There are always murmurs, footsteps, the shuffle of magazines, the hiss of air vents. But in that instant, silence swallowed everything. Even the engines, roaring beneath them, seemed to recede into the background. It was Sarah Blake who finally broke the quiet. Her voice came sharp and certain. She hit him. We all saw it. That's assault. The words unleashed a torrent. Passengers erupted, voices overlapping in outrage and disbelief. Someone shouted from the back, "You can't put your hands on him." Another voice, trembling with fury, said, "This is being recorded." You're done. Leah Martinez clutched her phone tighter, her live stream now climbing past 20,000 viewers. Her comments section exploded with rage, words flying faster than she could process. Assault, lawsuit, fire her. We're watching history. She whispered into her mic, her voice shaking. Viewers, this is real. Flight 619 en route to New York. A passenger has just been slapped by the chief flight attendant. I repeat, slapped. Christopher remained standing, his cheek burning, but his eyes calm, steady. He didn't raise his hands, didn't shout, didn't retaliate. His voice, when it came, was low, but carried through the entire cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This is not about me. It is about all of us. What just happened is unacceptable, and it will be addressed. The steadiness of his tone steadied others. Passengers who had risen half out of their seats eased back down, though their eyes stayed fixed on the confrontation. The hum of outrage softened to murmurs, but the energy in the air remained charged, electric. Claire Donovan stood frozen. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes darting from passenger to passenger, as if searching for an ally. But none came. Even Gregory Holt, who had initially tolerated her behavior with quiet disgust, now leaned forward, his face carved in disbelief. "You just destroyed your career," Gregory said flatly. "You don't lay hands on passengers? Ever." Claire's lips parted, but no words came. She looked down at her trembling hand, the hand that had lashed out with such sudden violence, and for a moment she seemed to realize the enormity of what she had done. But pride kept her from apology. Instead, she forced her voice steady. He was being disruptive. He refused to comply. "I was maintaining order." Gasps and groans met her words. Sarah Blake nearly leapt from her seat. Disruptive. "He hasn't raised his voice once. The only disruption here is you." Samuel Brooks, the veteran in 5C, spoke with quiet authority, his words cutting through the chaos. "I've served my country. I've seen men broken under fire, and I've been on more flights than I can count. This man has been nothing but calm. What you did was unprovoked, and we all saw it." The cabin nodded, passengers murmuring agreement. Claire's last shield, her claim of authority, shattered under the weight of dozens of witnesses. Christopher drew a slow breath, his thoughts churning beneath his calm surface. Inside, he was wrestling with memory. He remembered a boyhood trip on a Greyhound bus when an older woman had told his mother they were sitting in the wrong section. He remembered being stopped by police at 19 for driving a car that looked too expensive. He remembered being mistaken for staff at a gala where he was the keynote speaker. And now this, 30,000 feet above the ground. A reminder that no title, no achievement, no wealth could insulate him entirely from the gaze of prejudice. But this time, something was different. This time, the world was watching in real time. Leah's phone buzzed with notifications. She glanced at the screen. 50,000 live viewers, she whispered. Her comments section blazed. "This is going viral. Get his name. Who is he? This will hit the news before they land." Christopher sat back down slowly, his movements deliberate, reclaiming his seat with the dignity of a king ascending a throne. He rested his hands on his knees, the mark on his cheek visible to all. He spoke again, his voice measured. "You don't have to defend me. The truth is already clear. The truth doesn't need shouting." His calm was disarming, even comforting. Passengers who had been on the verge of panic steadied themselves. Sarah Blake wiped at her eyes, overcome by both anger and admiration. Gregory Holt shook his head, muttering, "Strongest man I've ever seen." But Claire couldn't stop herself. The weight of judgment pressing in from every direction ignited her pride once more. Her voice cracked as she snapped, "You're all overreacting. This is my job, my responsibility. I decide who disrupts this cabin, and he isn't disrupting anyone." Samuel Brooks cut in firmly. "You are." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the coach cabin beyond the curtain had gone quiet, passengers straining to catch every word. Claire faltered. She backed a step, her confidence crumbling. Her eyes darted toward the galley, toward escape, but she knew everyone knew there was no escape. Phones had captured everything. Witnesses surrounded her. The stain of her action was permanent. Christopher closed his eyes briefly, inhaling. His thoughts whispered to him like a chorus of ghosts. Is this the moment? Do I reveal who I am? Do I end this now, or let it unravel further? His father's voice rose above the din in his mind. You are more than the insult. You are more than the blow. Hold steady. But remember, silence can be surrender too. He opened his eyes and turned toward Leah. For the first time, he acknowledged the phone. Keep recording, he said gently. Leah nodded, her throat tight. Her viewers shot past 70,000. Passengers murmured again, stunned by his composure. He was not lashing out, not seeking vengeance. He was holding steady, building something larger than outrage. Gregory leaned closer, lowering his voice. Why are you letting her dig her own grave like this? You could end it right now. Christopher turned slightly, his lips curling in the faintest smile. Because the world needs to see the full truth, not the edited version, the truth as it is. Gregory sat back, silenced not by command, but by understanding. Claire's breathing quickened. She glanced toward the cockpit, her last refuge of authority. I'll speak to the captain, she said stiffly. He'll back me. Do that, Christopher replied evenly. I welcome it. She faltered, the certainty draining from her eyes. Something in his tone, quiet, confident, absolute, unnerved her. For the first time since boarding, Claire wondered who he truly was. The cabin seemed to hold its breath again. Leah's livestream surged past 100,000 viewers. The story was no longer confined to an airplane. It was already rippling through phones across the world. Christopher rested back in his seat, his cheek still marked, his expression calm. Inside, though, his mind burned with decision. He knew what came next. He knew the truth of his identity would shatter the cabin, and soon, the world beyond it. But for now, he let the silence speak louder than any revelation. The slap had been seconds. The shockwave was only beginning. The slap had ignited the fire. The murmurs, the outrage, the recording phones, none of it subsided. If anything, the energy in the cabin intensified with each passing minute. Claire Donovan stood near the galley now, her back stiff, her eyes fixed anywhere but on Christopher Langston. Her hands still trembled, betraying the storm inside her. Christopher sat quietly in 2C, one hand resting on the armrest, the other on his knee. The mark on his cheek had darkened, the outline of her fingers still visible, yet his composure never wavered. He looked not like a victim, nor like a man humiliated, but like someone waiting with purpose, someone measuring every moment. Leah Martinez's phone streamed relentlessly, the number of viewers climbing toward 150,000. Her voice was hushed but steady as she narrated. The captain has been called. We don't know what will happen next. Everyone here knows what we saw. A paying passenger was slapped by the chief flight attendant. The entire cabin saw it. Gregory Holt leaned toward Christopher, his voice low. Listen, I don't know who you are, but you've got the patience of a saint. If that had been me, I'd be raising hell right now. Christopher's eyes shifted toward him, calm, unwavering. Sometimes the quietest storms cause the most lasting change. Gregory blinked, sat back, and for once in his life was speechless. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Fraser. We understand there's been a situation in the cabin. Please remain calm. A supervisor will meet us upon landing to address any issues. Thank you for your cooperation. Passengers muttered in disbelief. Sarah Blake shook her head. A situation. That's what they're calling it. Samuel Brooks leaned forward, his gravelly voice cutting through. They'll see more than a situation. They'll see truth. The curtain to the cockpit opened. and Captain Daniel Fraser himself stepped into first class. Tall, mid-50s, his uniform crisp, his expression controlled. He looked from Claire to Christopher, then at the murmuring passengers, his brow furrowing. "Sir," he addressed Christopher, "I've been told there was a disturbance." Claire seized the chance to regain control. "Captain, this passenger refused to comply with instructions. He became disruptive, and when I attempted to maintain order, he escalated the situation." The gas came instantly. Sarah nearly jumped from her seat. Gregory barked, "That's a lie. We all saw what happened." Leah held her phone higher, her voice sharp. "Captain, I've been live streaming since before she laid a hand on him. Hundreds of thousands are watching right now. She's lying." Captain Fraser's jaw tightened. He turned to Christopher, his voice respectful but careful. "Sir, would you like to explain your side?" Christopher rose slowly, towering but composed. His eyes swept the cabin, acknowledging the witnesses, the phones, the passengers who had spoken for him when he had remained silent. Then he turned his steady gaze on the captain. "There was no disturbance until she made one," he said calmly. "I sat in my seat, showed my boarding pass twice, and asked for the same courtesy given to everyone else. Instead, I was singled out, told I didn't belong, and struck in front of this entire cabin." His words were even, but the weight behind them filled the space. Passengers nodded vigorously, voices murmuring in agreement. The captain studied him, then glanced at the mark on his cheek. His frown deepened. He turned back to Claire. "Is that true?" Her voice cracked. "He's twisting the situation." "Aye, enough," Samuel Brooks thundered from 5C. "We all saw it. Don't insult our intelligence." Leah's phone vibrated wildly in her hand. She glanced at the screen. 200,000 viewers, she whispered, almost in awe. Claire's face blanched. For the first time, the magnitude of her actions pressed fully upon her. The witnesses, the live stream, the captain's stern eyes, the mark on Christopher's face. There was no escape. Christopher exhaled slowly, then reached into his backpack. He pulled out a slim leather folder, unzipped it, and withdrew a sleek black identification card embossed with silver lettering. He held it calmly, not flaunting, but steady, undeniable. "My name is Christopher Langston," he said evenly, his voice filling the cabin without strain. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Aurelia Air." The cabin erupted, gasps, whispers, shock flooding every row. Gregory Holt's jaw dropped. Sarah Blake covered her mouth with both hands. Samuel Brooks leaned back slowly, nodding with satisfaction. And Leah's live stream surged past 300,000 viewers as comments exploded across the screen. "He's the CEO." She slapped the CEO of the airline. "This is unreal." Claire's knees buckled. No, that can't be." Her voice trailed off, her face ashen. Christopher's gaze never wavered. "I didn't intend to reveal that here. Not like this. I came on this flight as a passenger, not as a CEO, not as a title, not as anything more than a man traveling from San Diego to New York. But what you did—" He paused, his voice steady but heavy. "What you did wasn't about a seat, or a pass, or a uniform. It was about who you thought belonged here and who you thought didn't." The captain's expression hardened. He straightened, his authority clear. "Mr. Langston, I assure you this will be addressed immediately upon landing. Ms. Donovan, return to the galley and remain there until further notice." Claire opened her mouth, but no words came. Her legs carried her backward, retreating through the curtain like a shadow dissolving into the dark. Passengers burst into murmurs again. Sarah leaned across the aisle. "Mr. Langston, I don't even know what to say." "You handled that with more grace than most of us could dream of." Gregory let out a sharp laugh, half disbelieving, half impressed. "You sat here the whole time, calm as a stone, while she slapped the man who owns the airline. I'll never forget this." Leah lowered her phone briefly, her eyes wide. "Sir, people all over the world are watching this. It's trending already. They're calling it the slap at 30,000 feet. Christopher sank back into his seat, his shoulders still steady, but his mind racing. Inside, he felt a flood of emotions: anger tightly leashed, sadness at the familiarity of the insult, and the heavy knowledge that this was now bigger than a single confrontation. He thought of his employees, thousands of flight attendants, gate agents, pilots, mechanics, many of whom worked with dignity and kindness every day. This single moment would cast a shadow over them all. He thought of the industry, of the passengers who would demand answers, of the board in New York that would expect him to turn this crisis into reform. But more than that, he thought of the countless travelers who had endured treatment like this without the shield of a title, without the power of a CEO's name. He thought of them, and he knew his next steps had to be for them. The captain lingered a moment longer, then inclined his head respectfully. "Mr. Langston." "I'll notify ground control. We'll have security waiting at JFK. Is there anything you'd like in the meantime?" Christopher shook his head. "No, I have everything I need." His words carried a resonance deeper than their simplicity, because what he had is calm, his dignity, the truth witnessed by hundreds of eyes and thousands of screens, was more powerful than any outburst could ever be. Leah raised her phone again, whispering into her mic. "You just heard it. Folks, he's the CEO of Aurelia Air. This story isn't ending when we land. It's only beginning." The hum of the engines filled the silence once more. The cabin had become a courtroom, a stage, a broadcast. And Christopher Langston, the man in the hoodie who had asked for nothing but equal treatment, now sat at the center, not as a victim, not even as just a CEO, but as the embodiment of a truth too long ignored. The reveal had come. The storm was only growing. The captain returned to the cockpit, the curtain swaying closed behind him, and the cabin seemed to exhale as one. But the release was not relief, it was anticipation. The truth was out. The passengers knew. The live stream had broadcast it to hundreds of thousands. And still, they were trapped together in this pressurized tube, 30,000 feet in the air, bound for New York. Christopher Langston remained seated in 2C, the red mark fading to a deep flush on his cheek. His posture was upright, his presence steady, but his thoughts churned beneath the calm surface. He had revealed who he was, the board, the employees, the shareholders by now. Many of them were likely aware. The story would not wait until landing. It was already sprinting across the internet at the speed of light. He glanced toward Leah Martinez. She held her phone like a lifeline, her face pale but determined. Every so often she whispered to her viewers, narrating the silence, explaining the weight in the air. "We're about 2 hours from landing. Everyone's quiet now. The captain knows. The passengers know. The world knows." Gregory Holt leaned back in his seat, his hand rubbing his temple. He was a man used to controlling narratives, spinning stories for financial advantage. But this was different. He whispered, half to himself, Stock's gonna take a hit the second this goes mainstream. Hell, it probably already has. Sarah Blake turned sharply toward him. This isn't about stock prices. Gregory blinked, then gave a short nod. No, you're right. It's bigger. Samuel Brooks sat still, his hands folded over his lap, his eyes, sharp with age and experience, stayed locked on Christopher. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice soft but audible. You carry yourself like a soldier. Son, calm under fire. Makes the rest of us calm too. Christopher inclined his head, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Maybe that's all we can do when storms hit. Hold steady. Outside the windows, the endless quilt of clouds parted to reveal patches of blue. Sunlight glared across the wing, the shimmer of atmosphere fragile and endless. Below, the ground was invisible still, but they were drawing closer every minute. Claire Donovan had not returned. The passengers assumed she had retreated to the galley, her career collapsing with every second of silence. Some felt pity. Most felt only anger. Sarah muttered once, "She should be in handcuffs when we land." Leah's livestream comments section agreed overwhelmingly. Words like arrest, termination, and lawsuit filled her screen. Christopher closed his eyes briefly. The hum of the engines became a lull, and within that sound, he let his thoughts wander deeper. He remembered his first flight as a boy, Memphis to Atlanta, summer heat clinging to his skin, his mother holding his hand so tightly that he still felt the echo of her grip decades later. They'd sat in coach, row 29, near the lavatory. The flight attendant back then had bent down, offered him a plastic set of wings, pinned it gently to his shirt. "Someday," she'd said, "you might be up front in the cockpit." He had believed her, and he had built his life to make it true. Navy pilot, MBA, years of grinding through every rung of the airline industry. Now CEO of Aurelia Air, the boy with the plastic wings had climbed higher than she could have imagined. And yet, here he sat, still told he didn't belong, still slapped like he was less than human. The ache of that realization dug deep. But alongside it came something stronger, a fire. The knowledge that his story was not just his own, that every insult, every act of dismissal, every hand raised in prejudice had been borne by millions before him, and that his response here would ripple beyond himself. He opened his eyes again, steadier than before. Leah caught his gaze. "They're asking what you're going to do when we land," she whispered. "My viewers. They all want to know." Christopher considered, then spoke softly, his voice carrying further than he intended. "I'm going to tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. The truth is enough." Passengers shifted, nodding. Sarah murmured, "Yes, the truth is enough." Gregory exhaled heavily, muttering, "The truth's going to cost the airline millions, maybe billions." Samuel Brooks leaned forward, his eyes on Christopher. "Then let it. Better to pay millions than to carry injustice for free." The words settled like scripture in the cabin. Time passed slowly, each minute heavy with expectation. The attendants who remained on duty moved stiffly, avoiding row 2, their eyes downcast. Service became perfunctory, mechanical. The warmth drained from it entirely. No one seemed hungry. No one wanted a drink. They were waiting. All of them. At last, the intercom chimed. Captain Fraser's voice filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into New York. Please fasten your seat belts and prepare for landing. Ground personnel will be meeting the aircraft immediately upon arrival." Murmurs rippled through the rows. Leah's phone comments exploded again. It's happening. Ground confrontation coming. This is history in the making. Christopher adjusted his seatbelt, his movements deliberate. His face remained composed, but inside, the weight of decision pressed down. Do I walk off quietly? Let the board handle it behind closed doors? Do I demand accountability on the tarmac, in front of cameras? Do I stand as CEO, or as a man who refuses to accept humiliation? He thought of his children again. He thought of every passenger who had sat quietly through their own slaps, some verbal, some physical, all cutting. He thought of what silence would mean. No, silence was not an option. The skyline of New York emerged at last, glittering in the distance, sunlight flashing off towers of glass and steel. The city seemed to rise up to meet them, a symbol of reckoning, of confrontation, of transformation. Christopher leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered inwardly, "Let them all see." The landing gear dropped with a thud, the cabin shaking slightly as the plane descended through layers of cloud. Passengers gripped armrests, but their eyes never strayed far from row 2. They knew what was coming. They felt it in their bones. The wheels hit the runway with a jolt, brakes groaning, the engines roaring in reverse thrust. The plane slowed, veered toward the terminal, the hum of expectation louder than the sound of rubber on asphalt. Christopher opened his eyes as the plane taxied. He looked calm, but his pulse quickened. The storm was about to move from the sky to the ground, from whispers in a cabin to shouts across the world, and he was ready. The plane slowed as it taxied toward the gate. The engines whined, the weight of the aircraft pressing against the brakes, and all the while the silence in the cabin felt like it could shatter with a single breath. Everyone knew what awaited them beyond the door. Security, press, cameras, judgment. Christopher Langston sat steady in 2C, his hands folded loosely on his lap. The red handprint on his cheek had softened to a bruise-colored shadow, but its meaning still blazed bright in the minds of everyone present. He looked neither left nor right. His gaze stayed fixed forward, beyond the bulkhead, beyond the curtain, to the moment that was coming. Leah Martinez whispered into her phone. Her stream had now swelled past 300,000 live viewers. "We're rolling to the gate. Security is waiting. The captain already warned us. This is about to explode." Her voice trembled with awe more than fear. "Remember, you saw it happen here first. This isn't just a story anymore. It's history." Passengers shifted in their seats. Sarah Blake held her phone ready, her jaw set with righteous anger. Gregory Holt muttered numbers under his breath, calculations of damage, losses, lawsuits. Samuel Brooks sat upright, back straight, as if he were still in uniform. His eyes locked on Christopher with quiet pride. The aircraft came to a final halt at the gate. The seatbelt sign pinged off, but no one moved. Nobody dared to stand, even though instinct screamed to reach for bags, to rush toward the exit. They all waited. The front door cracked open with a metallic sigh of hydraulics. A blast of cool New York air swept in, carrying the sound of voices and footsteps. A line of uniformed security officers boarded first, followed by 2 supervisors in Navy suits with Aurelia Air badges clipped to their jackets. Cameras were visible behind them, flashing as media had already gathered in the terminal. The lead officer, tall and composed, stepped into the first-class cabin. His eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on Christopher, then on Claire Donovan, who emerged pale-faced from the galley. The officer's voice was firm but professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated. We need to speak to crew and a passenger before deplaning begins." The air tightened. Phones rose higher. Leah's stream comments flew by in a blur. Here it comes. Justice now. Don't let her walk away. Claire stood rigid near the galley wall, her hands clasped in front of her. The confidence she'd worn hours earlier was gone. Her eyes darted from the officer to Christopher, then back again. She looked smaller, diminished, as if her uniform itself had shrunk around her. The supervisor in the navy suit stepped forward. "Mr. Langston," he said quietly, inclining his head, though he already knew the answer. "Are you the individual who was assaulted?" Christopher rose slowly from 2C, his height commanding the space. "I am." His voice carried the kind of calm authority that left no doubt. Claire flinched as if struck again. The cabin filled with murmurs. Sarah whispered to her phone, "That's the CEO. He said it himself." The supervisor nodded solemnly. "Mr. Langston, officers will escort you to a private area for your safety. Ms. Donovan?" His eyes turned sharp as glass. "You'll come with us as well." Claire's voice cracked. She swallowed, forcing the words out. "I didn't mean—" But the passengers erupted. Sarah's voice rang out. "We all saw what you did," Samuel Brooks thundered. "Don't you dare excuse it." Even Gregory, who had been detached, added sharply, "The cameras don't lie. The whole world saw. Phones recorded every word," Leah narrated softly. "She's trying to speak, but no one's buying it. The supervisors aren't either." Her viewer count ticked toward 400,000. Claire's hands trembled. She turned toward Christopher, desperation in her eyes. "Please, I was under stress. My divorce, the hours, the pressure. I didn't mean to." Christopher held her gaze. His face was unreadable, his posture steady. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, but carried to every corner of the cabin. "Ma'am, stress doesn't give permission to humiliate, discriminate, or strike another human being. Every employee has pressure. Every passenger has burdens. But dignity is not optional. Respect is not negotiable." His words landed heavier than any shout could have. Several passengers murmured their agreement. Samuel closed his eyes. Nodding, Leah whispered, "That's going viral already." Claire's lip trembled. She seemed to shrink under the weight of his words. But then, in a final burst of defiance, she snapped, "You don't understand what it's like years in this job, treated like dirt by passengers, by management, overlooked, ignored, and then someone like you comes in, dressed like... She faltered, realizing she was about to repeat the prejudice that had undone her. But her silence was too late. Everyone knew what she had meant. Christopher's expression hardened just slightly. "Someone like me," he repeated. "Yes, that's the truth, isn't it? You didn't see a CEO. You didn't see a man with decades of service to this industry. You saw only what you wanted to see, and you acted on it." Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The officer stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Ms. Donovan, you're under investigation for assault aboard an aircraft. You'll come with us." Gas rippled. Phones rose higher still. Claire's eyes went wide, her voice breaking into panic. "No, please. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. Please." But Christopher raised a hand, steady and firm. Enough. His voice wasn't cruel. It was final. "You made your choices. Now you'll face the consequences." The officers took hold of Claire gently but firmly, leading her up the aisle. Passengers angled their phones, recording the walk of shame. Comments on Leah's stream poured like a waterfall. "She's gone. Justice served. Look at his composure, what a leader." As Claire disappeared through the doorway, a heavy silence fell again. Everyone looked to Christopher, waiting. He turned to the supervisors. "I will be making a statement, not just as a CEO, but as a passenger. This isn't just about one incident. This is about how thousands are treated when no one is watching. That ends now." Sarah Blake exhaled sharply. "Thank God someone's finally saying it," Gregory Holt muttered. "Stock's crashing already. But maybe it's the price of change," Leah whispered into her phone. "You all heard him. He's not going to sweep it away. This is going to change everything." Christopher's mind, though calm on the surface, churned with questions. Could the airline survive the fallout? Could he balance justice with protecting thousands of employees who had nothing to do with this? Was he strong enough to lead them through the storm that was already building outside those doors? He inhaled, steadying himself. Leadership wasn't about avoiding storms. It was about walking straight through them, holding steady for everyone else. The officer returned. "Mr. Langston, ground security is ready. There's media outside. Do you wish to avoid them?" Christopher looked around the cabin, at Sarah's determined face, at Samuel's steady eyes, at Gregory's conflicted frown, at Leah, still broadcasting to nearly 500,000 people. Then he shook his head. "No. If this moment belongs to the public, then let the public see it. All of it." The supervisor hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, sir. We'll escort you." The passengers began to clap tentative at first, then building until the sound filled the cabin. It wasn't just applause for Christopher. It was release, relief, gratitude that someone, finally, was standing for dignity. Christopher inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Then he stepped into the aisle, tall, composed, every inch the leader he was born to be. Beyond the door, the flash of cameras lit the tunnel like lightning. The storm had arrived, and Christopher Langston was walking straight into it. The jet bridge stretched ahead, narrow and gray, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. For most passengers, it was just a corridor, a forgettable link between sky and ground. But for Christopher Langston, it felt like a threshold. Beyond the final bend waited cameras, microphones, headlines. His every step would be recorded, dissected, broadcast to millions. He walked with measured pace, escorted by 2 officers and flanked by Aurelia Air supervisors. Behind him, the passengers watched through the open cabin door. Sarah Blake whispered, "He's going out there. No hiding." Leah Martinez narrated into her phone, "He's walking to the jet bridge now. This is it." Her viewer count shot toward 500,000. Claire Donovan had already been led away, her shoulders hunched, wrists cuffed, head ducked to avoid the lenses that still caught her every angle. The contrast between her collapse and Christopher's composure was stark, almost cinematic. At the bend of the jet bridge, the flash of bulbs lit the corridor in staccato bursts. Voices rose. "Mr. Langston, Mr. Langston, is it true? You were assaulted by your own employee. What happens to Aurelia Air now?" Christopher paused at the doorway, steadying himself. Inside. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with the gravity of the moment. He thought of his children, who would see this clip replayed endlessly. He thought of his employees, tens of thousands of them, who would look to him now for direction. And he thought of every traveler, every worker, who had been told with words or with silence that they didn't belong. He stepped forward into the sea of cameras, microphones thrust toward him. Reporters shouted, tripping over one another, "Mr. Langston!" Why didn't you intervene sooner? Why conceal your identity until after the slap? Are you pressing charges? The flashes painted his face in harsh light, highlighting the faint bruise along his cheek. He raised a hand, not in anger, but in calm, commanding stillness. The crowd hushed. Christopher's voice was even, his cadence measured, perfect for the microphones that caught every syllable. Yes, I was assaulted on Flight 619 by a member of our crew. Yes, it was captured on video and live-streamed. But this is not just about one flight attendant or one incident. This is about something bigger, something that happens every day to people who don't have a title or cameras watching. The words fell heavy into the air. Reporters froze, their questions silenced by the weight of his tone. Passengers who had followed behind leaned against the walls of the jet bridge, watching with reverence. Leah whispered into her stream. You're hearing it live, unedited. He's speaking as CEO and as a passenger. Christopher continued, I revealed my identity only when I had to, because I wanted the truth to show itself. And it did. What happened today was wrong. But the deeper wrong is the system that allows this kind of behavior to fester unchecked. We are going to change that. Not tomorrow, not in a press release, but starting now. The murmur of the crowd rose, a low wave of astonishment. Sarah Blake wiped her eyes, whispering, This is history. A reporter called out, Are you pressing charges against the flight attendant? Christopher held the question in the air for a moment, his expression thoughtful. That decision will be made by the authorities. What matters more is the principle. No passenger, no human being, deserves to be struck, dismissed, or degraded because of who they are or how they look. The uniform does not give permission to abuse. It gives responsibility to serve with dignity. The supervisors flanking him shifted, their faces pale. They knew the implications. This wasn't a CEO sweeping trouble under a rug. This was an indictment broadcast live. Leah's phone buzzed as comments surged. Leader of the Year. This man is changing history live. Dignity in the sky, trending now. Christopher went on. For Aurelia Air, this is a turning point. We will not hide behind procedure or legal jargon. We will take responsibility, and I will personally lead reforms to ensure this never happens again, not just here, but across our industry. If I must use my position to force that change, I will. The flashbulbs erupted again. Reporters shouted follow-ups. What reforms? Mr. Langston, are you admitting systemic failure in your company? He raised a hand once more. Steady. You'll hear the details soon. But know this. No contract, no profit margin, no convenience is more important than dignity. Dignity is not negotiable. The words landed like a gavel in a courtroom. Even hardened journalists stilled, their pens pausing over notepads. Behind him, Samuel Brooks' gravelly voice broke the moment, directed toward a nearby camera. That's a leader. I've followed many. That's what one looks like. Reporters swarmed with more questions, but Christopher signaled to the officers. They guided him toward a waiting car outside the terminal. The flashes followed, voices echoing in pursuit, but his pace never faltered. Calm, steady, purposeful. Passengers spilled into the terminal after him, buzzing with adrenaline. Sarah spoke to a microphone shoved in her direction. He handled himself with grace. I'll never forget it. He could have shouted. He could have raged. But he didn't. He let the truth convict her. Gregory Holt found himself cornered by another reporter. For once, the businessman dropped his usual arrogance. I thought it was just a dispute at first, but seeing him hold steady like that, he taught us something. You don't need to shout to show strength. The market will punish us. But maybe that's the cost of learning what we should have known all along. Inside the car, away from the flashes at last. Christopher leaned back into the leather seat, the door shut, muting the chaos. For the first time since the slap, he allowed himself a long, deep exhale. The officer beside him asked gently, "Sir, do you need medical attention?" Christopher shook his head. "No, I need something bigger." "What's that?" He looked out the window at the skyline rising in the distance. Accountability. The word carried the weight of promise. Leah's stream finally cut off as her battery died, but not before it reached nearly 600,000 live viewers. Screenshots, clips, and hashtags were already flooding the internet. By the time the plane's passengers left the terminal, the story had gone global. And in the back seat of the black sedan, Christopher Langston knew this was only the beginning. The Aurelia Air headquarters towered above downtown Manhattan like a gleaming sentinel, its glass facade catching the morning light. Hours had passed since Flight 619 landed, but the storm had only intensified. News vans choked the street, satellite dishes bristling against the skyline. Reporters clustered outside the lobby doors, microphones poised, their voices rising in chaotic chorus. Inside, the marble atrium buzzed with tension. Employees who usually hurried through the revolving doors to morning meetings now lingered near railings and escalators, whispering in disbelief. Screens across the lobby streamed footage from Leah Martinez's viral live broadcast. The slap, the silence, the revelation. The CEO standing calm while chaos raged around him. Christopher Langston walked through the main entrance without an entourage, wearing the same dark blazer he had slipped on before facing the cameras at JFK. The faint red mark still lingered on his cheek, a visible reminder of what had happened. He paused for a brief second, scanning the space. He noticed the hushed voices, the employees clutching phones, the looks of worry and something else expectation. He stepped into the elevator that would take him to the top floor. By the time he reached the conference center, the room was already packed. Executives lined one side of the long oak table, board members the other. At the far end stood a podium with a microphone, framed by two flags, the American flag and Aurelia Air's blue and gold banner. Beyond the glass doors, rows of chairs filled with journalists faced the dais, cameras already rolling. Linda Carmichael, head of communications, hurried over. Her usually flawless composure showed cracks a stray strand of hair, a sheen of sweat at her temple. "Chris, the press is ravenous. They've been waiting for hours. Some are saying this is the biggest corporate scandal in years." Christopher gave a small nod. "Then let's give them the truth." The room hushed as he approached the podium. Camera lights flickered on. The low murmur of journalists stilled into silence. Christopher looked out at the sea of lenses and notepads. But beyond them he imagined something larger, the millions watching from living rooms, from phones on commuter trains, from laptops in airport lounges. He felt the weight of their gaze, and he welcomed it. His voice, steady and low, filled the hall. "Good morning. My name is Christopher Langston. As many of you know, I am the CEO of Aurelia Air. 3 hours ago, I was assaulted by a member of my own crew aboard Flight 619. You've seen the videos. You've read the posts. You've heard the outrage. But I stand before you not to dwell on the harm to me, but to talk about the harm that has been allowed to fester in this industry for far too long." The words landed heavy, measured. I boarded Flight 619 anonymously, dressed like any other traveler, because I wanted to see firsthand how our employees treat passengers when they don't know who is watching. I discovered, painfully, that even here on my airline, under my leadership bias still seeps into service, that silence and humiliation can be as wounding as violence, and that the line between the two is thinner than most admit. He paused, letting the silence stretch, the cameras clicking in the quiet. His eyes swept the room. Some reporters looked stunned. Others scribbled furiously. Aurelia Air will not hide from this. We will not say this was one rogue employee and move on, because that would be a lie. What happened on Flight 619 was the act of an individual. Yes, but it was made possible by a culture that has not done enough to confront unconscious bias, systemic discrimination, and the misuse of authority. The tension in the room tightened. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced down. Others stared straight ahead, bracing for what was coming. Christopher leaned forward slightly, his hands braced on the podium. Today, I am announcing a comprehensive reform initiative, effective immediately. Aurelia Air will implement the following measures. First, every single frontline employee flight attendants, gate agents, supervisors will undergo mandatory anti-bias and dignity in service training. Not once a year, not as a checkbox exercise, but quarterly, immersive, and designed in partnership with independent civil rights organizations. Second, we are establishing a real-time reporting system that bypasses local supervisors. Passengers and employees alike will be able to submit complaints of discrimination or misconduct directly to a centralized oversight team that reports to me. Third, accountability will be tied to leadership. Starting this quarter, executive bonuses will be contingent on measurable improvements in dignity scores, metrics tracking, how passengers of all backgrounds experience our service. If we fail, our leaders' compensation fails with it. Fourth, Aurelia Air will fund an independent ombudsman office completely separate from our chain of command that has the authority to investigate incidents and publish findings publicly. Transparency is not optional. And finally, Aurelia Air will commit $50 million over the next decade to establish the Sky Dignity Foundation, dedicated to supporting diversity in aviation careers and ensuring that the next generation of airline professionals reflects the passengers we serve. The room erupted. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. The words rolled through the hall like a shockwave. One journalist called out, "Mr. Langston, are you admitting your airline has systemic discrimination?" Christopher's gaze was unwavering. I'm admitting the truth. This airline is part of an industry that has failed too many passengers for too long. And we are going to change that. Not with slogans, not with polished commercials, but with action, accountability, and transparency. Another shouted, "Will the flight attendant face charges?" He held the gaze of the questioner. That is for law enforcement to decide. But her employment with Aurelia Air ended the moment she struck me. Beyond that, I ask that the world remember this: she is not the whole story. She is not the only problem. To stop at punishing her would be to miss the lesson. From the back row, Leah Martinez raised her hand. Her live stream had carried his words to hundreds of thousands earlier. Now she was here in person, her phone still recording. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "people all over the world watched you stay calm while being humiliated. What gave you the strength to respond with dignity instead of anger?" Christopher met her gaze, and for the first time, his voice softened. Because anger is what the world expects. Dignity is what the world needs. I've spent my life being told, in subtle and not so subtle ways, that I didn't belong. And I learned something: when you meet hate with fury, you feed it. But when you meet it with calm truth, you starve it. The room went silent again, the weight of his words pressing into every corner. Cameras zoomed closer, capturing not just the man, but the conviction etched into his face. For the next half hour, he fielded questions, laying out timelines, benchmarks, oversight structures. He promised quarterly reports to the public, town halls with passengers, a hotline staffed 24 hours a day. Every answer was measured, deliberate, but alive with the urgency of a man who knew this was his legacy in the making. When he finally stepped away from the podium, the room erupted again, not with chaos this time, but with a rising chorus of shouted questions he chose not to answer. His statement had been enough. Backstage, Linda Carmichael caught his arm. Her voice was hushed, incredulous. "Chris, you just changed the entire playbook. Not just for us, for the whole industry." He gave a tired half smile. "Then maybe we're finally on the right flight path." As he walked down the quiet hallway toward his office, the noise of the press conference fading behind him, Christopher felt the familiar tug of weariness. But beneath it thrummed something else: resolve. The battle was only beginning, but the course was set. The slap had started it. His response would define it. The storm that began on Flight 619 did not fade when the wheels touched down at JFK, nor when Christopher Langston faced the cameras on the jet bridge, nor even after the press conference that sent shockwaves across the industry. Instead, it spread outward, like ripples from a stone cast into still water, each circle touching lives far beyond the airline's walls. By the following morning, headlines dominated every major outlet. CEO slapped on his own airline responds with dignity, not fury. Langston unveils 50 Moser Sky Dignity Initiative. Dignity in the sky goes global. Clips of the incident played on a loop across television and social media: the slap, the silence, the reveal, the speech. Some called it the most important moment in aviation since deregulation. Others compared it to corporate scandals that had toppled giants. But this time, the narrative was different. The man at the center wasn't scrambling to hide. He was leading from the fire, within Aurelia Air. The reforms Christopher announced began immediately. Training modules were drafted in record time, but not the usual hollow slide decks. Instead, civil rights experts, sociologists, and former passengers who had faced discrimination helped design immersive workshops. Employees were flown to regional hubs for face-to-face training, their voices invited into the process. Skepticism lingered at first, but slowly, something shifted. Supervisors who once treated complaints as paperwork began listening. Flight attendants, often stretched thin and defensive, started speaking openly about stress, burnout, and the need for compassion. Gate agents, once quick to brush off difficult interactions, began asking themselves harder questions. Am I treating every passenger the same, or just the ones who look like me? And through it all, Christopher remained visible. He didn't retreat to boardrooms or leave implementation to others. He walked terminals unannounced, rode jump seats on flights, sat in break rooms with crew members. Employees were startled at first, but soon they realized he wasn't there to intimidate. He was there to listen. Outside the airline, the impact spread even faster. The FAA, under pressure from Congress and public opinion, convened hearings within weeks. Clips of Flight 619 were played before lawmakers. Witnesses testified, and Christopher himself was called to speak, calm and deliberate. He repeated the same message he had given at JFK. Dignity is not negotiable. Other airlines scrambled to respond. Some issued rushed statements promising to review policies. Others quietly reached out to Christopher, asking for guidance. By the end of the year, 5 major carriers had announced their own reforms, many modeled on Aurelia's initiatives. But the change wasn't just corporate. Ordinary travelers felt it too. Passengers who had once swallowed indignities quietly now spoke up, citing Flight 619 as their inspiration. Community groups formed online, sharing stories, offering advice, holding airlines accountable. And for those who had long been told they didn't belong in certain seats, in certain cabins, in certain spaces, the image of Christopher Langston, calm and dignified, even with the sting of a slap fresh on his cheek, became a symbol of resistance. The personal aftermath was more complicated. Christopher's days became a blur of interviews, board meetings, staff briefings, and strategy sessions. Every move was scrutinized, every word parsed. His family shielded him as best they could, but he felt the toll nights where exhaustion dragged at his bones, mornings where the weight of expectation pressed hard against his chest. And yet, when doubt crept in, he remembered the cabin of Flight 619, the silence after the slap, the eyes of passengers waiting to see how he would respond, the voice of his father echoing in memory. Silence can be strength, but sometimes silence is surrender. That memory steeled him. Months passed, complaints dropped, not to zero, but measurably, tangibly. Passenger satisfaction scores rose. Employee surveys showed a culture slowly shifting. The Sky Dignity Foundation awarded its first scholarships to aspiring pilots, mechanics, and engineers from underrepresented communities. One of them, a young woman from Detroit, wrote in her essay, "I want to be the captain who never lets anyone doubt they belong on my flight." Leah Martinez's live stream became more than a viral moment. She was invited to speak at universities, to write op-eds, to tell the story from her perspective. She credited Christopher's calm with inspiring her own path law school, no longer just about corporate litigation, but about civil rights. Samuel Brooks returned to his quiet life, but not before being honored at Aurelia's headquarters. Gregory Holt, once cynical, publicly admitted that Flight 619 had changed him. "I saw what real strength looks like," he told a finance journal. "It's not the kind that shouts the loudest. It's the kind that holds steady when the world's watching." As for Claire Donovan, her name faded from headlines, but not from memory. She faced charges, though eventually accepted a plea deal. In a rare interview months later, she admitted her shame. "I let my bitterness become cruelty. I struck a man who showed me nothing but calm. That moment cost me everything, but maybe it taught me too." Christopher never spoke of her again. For him, she was not the story. She was the spark. The story was the movement. On the one-year anniversary of Flight 619, Aurelia Air held a ceremony at JFK. Employees, passengers, and community leaders gathered in a hangar beside one of the airline's gleaming jets. Cameras rolled as Christopher took the stage once more, the faintest trace of that long-healed bruise still visible in the images projected behind him. His speech was short. 1 year ago, a slap reminded us how fragile dignity can be, but it also reminded us how powerful dignity is when we choose it. Aurelia Air is not perfect. No airline is. But we have chosen a new path, one where respect is not an extra, but a standard, where passengers are not customers, but human beings, and where the sky belongs to everyone. The applause rose, not just polite, but heartfelt, echoing through the hangar, bouncing off the steel ribs of the aircraft beside them. That night, as Christopher sat alone in his office overlooking the city lights, he allowed himself a rare smile. The journey was far from over. The work would never be finished. But the legacy was taking shape, not built from contracts or profits, but from something stronger. A bruise had faded, but the truth it revealed would endure, and so would the promised dignity, in the sky and beyond, was not negotiable. A single slap, one moment of cruelty, and yet, from that moment, something greater was born. Christopher Langston could have chosen anger. He could have lashed out, demanded vengeance, or buried the story in silence. Instead, he chose dignity. And in that choice, he didn't just protect himself. He gave a voice to every passenger who had ever been told they didn't belong. This story is not only about a man or an airline. It is about all of us who carry the responsibility to treat each other with respect. No matter the uniform we wear, the color of our skin, or the seat we occupy. It is a reminder that prejudice, even at 30,000 feet, must never go unanswered. Let this moment stay with you. Let it remind you of the strength found in calm, the power of truth, and the hope that even in injustice, change can take flight. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, not just to support our channel, but to carry forward the message: dignity in the sky and dignity everywhere is not negotiable.